All right, guys, welcome to the last assignment for the year. We're going to finish up my side of the mountain, 148 through 177. I'll try to read as fast as I can so we can get through it. I have some slides. And without further ado, we'll kick this off. Page 148. More about the spring and the winter and the beginning of my story's end. The owl had broken the spell of winter. From that time on, things began to happen that you'd have to see to believe. Insects appeared while the snow was on the ground. Birds built nests, raccoons mated, foxes called to each other, seeking again their lifelong mates. At the end of February, the sap began to run into the maple trees. I tapped some trees and boiled the sap to syrup. It takes an awful lot of sap to make 1 cup of syrup, I discovered. 32 cups to be exact. And so, if you guys didn't know how they get maple syrup, is they stick a spigot here in the maple trees, and then drops of sap drip into these buckets, and then they boil them down to make syrup. All this, and I was still in my winter fur-lined underwear. One or two birds returned. The ferns by the protected spring unrolled very slowly, but they did. Then the activity gathered momentum, and before I was aware of the change, there were the skunk cabbages poking their funny blooms above the snow in the marsh. I picked some and cooked them, and they aren't any good. A skunk cabbage is a skunk cabbage. From my meadow, I could see the valleys turning green. My mountain was still snow capped, so I walked into the valleys almost every day to scout them for edible plants. Frightful rode down with me on my shoulder. She knew even better than I that the season had changed, and she watched the sky like radar. No life traveled that sky world unnoticed by Frightful. I thought she wanted to be free and seek a mate, but I could not let her go. I still depended upon her talents and company. Furthermore, she was different, and if I did let her go, she probably would have been killed by another female, for Frightful had no territory other than the hemlock patch, and her hunting instincts had been trained for man. She was a captive, not a wild bird, and that is almost another kind of bird. One day I was in the valley digging tubers and collecting the tiny new dandelion shoots when Frightful saw another duckhawk and flew from my shoulder like a bolt, pulling the leash from my hand as she went. Frightful, I called, you can't leave me now. I whistled, held out a piece of meat, and hoped she would not get her leash caught in a treetop. She hovered above my head, looked at the falcon, and then at my hand, folded her wings, and dropped to my fist. I saw that, a voice said. I spun around to see a young man about my own age shivering at the edge of the woods. You're the wild boy, aren't you? I was so astonished to see a human being in all this cold, thawing silence that I just stood and looked at him. Then I gathered my wits. I replied, no, I'm just a citizen. Ah, gee, he said with disappointment. Then he gave in to the cold and shivered until the twigs around him rattled. He stepped forward. Well, anyways, I'm Matt Spell. I work after school on the Poughkeepsie New Yorker, a newspaper. I read all the stories about the wild boy who lives in the Catskills, and I thought if I found him and got a good story, I might get to be a reporter. Have you ever run across him? Is there such a boy? Ah, it's all nonsense, I said, as I gathered some dry wood and piled it near the edge of the woods. I lit it swiftly, hoping he would not notice the flint and steel. He was so cold and so glad to see the flames that he said nothing. I rolled a log up to the fire for him and shoved it against the tree that was blocked from the raw, biting wind by a stand of hawthorns. He crouched over the flames for a long time, then practically burnt the soles of his shoes, warming his feet. He was that miserable. Why didn't you dress warmer for this kind of a trip? I asked. You'll die up here in this damp cold. I think I am dying, he said, sitting close to the fire. He almost smothered it. He was nice looking, about 13 or 14, I would have said. He had a good, bold face, blue eyes, hair about the color of my stream in the thaw. Although he was big, he looked like the kind of fellow who didn't know his own strength. I liked Matt. I still got a sandwich, he said. Want half? No thanks, I said. I brought my lunch. Frightful, I've been sitting on the shoulder through all this, but now the smoke was bothering her and she hopped to a higher perch. I still had her on the leash. There was a bird on your shoulder, Matt said. He had nice eyes. Do you know him? I'm sort of an amateur falconer, I replied. I come up here to train my bird. It's a she. Frightful is her name. Does she catch anything? Now and then. How hungry are you? I asked, as a second bite finished the sandwich. I'm starved, but don't share your lunch. I have some money. Just tell me which road takes you towards Delhi. I stood up and whistled to Frightful. She flew down. I undid her leash from her Jessie's. I stroked her head for a moment, then threw her into the air and walked out into the field, kicking the brush as I went. I'd noticed a lot of rabbit tracks earlier, and followed them over the muddy earth as best I could. Kicked up a rabbit with a twist. Frightful dropped out of the sky and took it. Roast rabbit is marvelous under any conditions, but when you're cold and hungry, it is superb. I enjoyed every bite. I worked on a small portion to be sociable, but I was not especially hungry. I dared not offer him the walnuts in my pocket, for too much had been written about that boy living off nuts. My whole circulatory system thanks you, Matt said. He meant it, for his hands and feet were now warm, and the blue color had left his lips and was replaced by a good warm red. By the way, what's your name? Sam Gribley, I said. Sam, if I could borrow a coat from you, I think I could make it to the bus station without freezing to death. I sure didn't think it would be so much colder in the mountains. I could mail it back to you. Well, I hesitated. My house is pretty far from here. I live on the Gribley farm and just come down here now and then to hunt with the falcon. But maybe we could find an old horse blanket or something in one of the deserted barns around here. Never mind, Sam. I'll run to keep warm. Have you an idea about this wild boy? Seen anyone that you think the stories might be referring to? Let's start towards the road, I said as I stamped out the fire. I wound him through the forest until I was dizzy and he was lost, then headed for the road. At the edge of the woods, I said, Matt, I have seen that boy. Matt's spell stopped. Gee, Sam, tell me about him. I could hear paper rattle and saw that Matt's cold hands were not too stiff to write in his notebook. We walked down the road a bit, and then I said, well, he ran away from home one day and never went back. Where does he live? What does he wear? We sat down on a stone along the edge of the road. It was behind a pine tree and out of the ripping wind. He lives west of here in a cave. He wears a bearskin coat, has long hair, all matted and full of burrs, and according to him, he fishes for a living. You talked to him? He asked brightly. Oh, yes, I talked to him. Oh, this is great, he wrote furiously. What color are his eyes? I think they are bluish gray with a little brown in them. His hair? Darkish. I couldn't really tell under all those coontails. Coontails? Do you suppose he killed them himself? No, it looks more like one of those hats you get with cereal box tops. Well, I won't say anything about it then, just coontail hat. Guys, this is a picture of a coontail hat in case you don't know. A coon is like a raccoon, and they're talking about this tail hanging down. Yeah, coontail hat's enough, I agreed. And I think his shoes were just newspapers tied around his feet. That's good insulation, you know. Yeah? Matt wrote that down. Did he say why he ran away? I never asked him. What does any boy run away? Matt put down his pencil and thought. Well, I ran away once because I thought how sorry everybody would be when I was gone, how they'd cry and wish they'd been nicer to me. He laughed. Then I said, I ran away once because I wanted to do something else. That's a good reason, said Matt. Do you suppose that's why? By the way, what is his name? I never asked him, I said truthfully. What do you suppose he really eats and lives on? Asked Matt. Fish, roots, berries, nuts, rabbits. There's a lot of food around the woods if you look for it, I guess. Roots wouldn't be good. Well, carrots are roots. By golly, they are, and so are potatoes, sort of. Fish, pondered Matt. I suppose there are lots of fish around here. The streams are full of them. You've really seen them, huh? He really is in these mountains? Sure, I've seen him, I said. Finally, I stood up. I gotta get home. I go the other way. You just follow this road to town, and I think you can get a bus from there. Now wait, he said. Let me read it back to you to check the details. Sure. Matt stood up, blew on his hands, and read. The wild boy of the Catskill does exist. He has dark brown hair, black eyes, and wears a handsome deerskin suit that he apparently made himself. He is ruddy and in excellent health, and he is able to build a fire with flint and steel as fast as a man can light a match. And so, guys, in case you didn't catch that, that newspaper boy figured out that Sam was the wild boy. His actual dwelling is a secret, but his means of support is a beautiful falcon. The falcon flies off the boy's fist and kills rabbits and pheasants. Then the boy needs food. He only takes what he needs. The boy's name is not known, but he ran away from home and never went back. No, Matt, no, I begged. I was about to wrestle it out with him when he said furtively, I'll make a deal with you. Let me spend my spring vacation with you, and I won't print a word of it. All right, only what you've told me. I looked at him and decided that it might be nice to have him. I said, I'll meet you outside of town any day you say, providing you let me blindfold you and lead you to my house, and providing you promise not to have a lot of photographers hiding in the woods. Do you know what would happen if you told on me? Sure. The newsreels would roll up, the TV cameras would arrive, reporters would hang in the trees, and you'd be famous. Yes, and back in New York City. All right, what you have said, and not even your mother will recognize you. Make it some other town, and it's a deal, I said. You might say I'm working for civil defense, doing research by learning to live off the land. Tell them not to be afraid that crayfish are delicious and caves are warm. Not like that. He sat down again. Tell me some of the plants and animals you eat so that they will know what to do. We can make this informative. I sat down and listed some of the better wild plants and the more easily obtainable mammals and fish. I gave him a few good recipes and told him that I didn't recommend anyone trying to live off the land unless they liked oysters and spinach. Not like that. He wrote and wrote. Finally, he said, my hands are cold. I'd better go, but I'll see you April 12th at 3:30 outside of town, okay? And just to prove that I'm a man of my word, I'll bring you a copy of what I write. Well, you better not give me away. I have a scout in civilization who follows all these stories. We shook hands and he departed at a brisk pace. I returned to my patch on the mountain, talking to myself all the way. I talk to myself a lot, but everyone does. The human being, even in the midst of people, spends 9/10 of his time alone with his private voices of his own head. Living alone on a mountain is not much more different, except that your speaking voice gets rusty. I talked inside my head all the way home, thinking up schemes, holding conversations with Bando and Dad and Matt Spell. I wondered the article for Matt. I worded the article for Matt after discussing it with Bando and made it sound very convincing without giving myself up. I kind of wanted to write it down and send it to Matt, but I didn't. I entered my tree, tired, frightful. I tied Frightful to the bedpost, and there was Jesse Coon Janes. It had been months since I'd seen him. He was curled up on my bed asleep. A turtle shell that had been full of cracked walnuts was empty beside him. He awoke, jumped to the floor, and walked slowly between my legs and out of the door. I had the feeling Jesse was hoping I had departed for good and that he could have my den. He was a comfort-loving creature. I was bigger and my hands were freer than his, so he conceded me the den. I watched him climb over the Baron's rock and shimmy up a hemlock. He moved heavily in the limbs, and it occurred to me that Jessie was a she Jessie, not a he Jessie. I cooked supper and then sat down by my little fire and called a forum. It is very sociable inside my head, and I have perfected the art of getting a lot of people arguing together in silence or in a forum, as I prefer to call it. I can get 4 people all talking at once, and a 5th can be present, but generally I can't get him to talk. Usually these forums discuss such things as a storm and whether or not it is coming, how to make a spring suit, and how to enlarge my house without destroying the life in the tree. Tonight, however, they discussed what to do about Matt Spell. Dad kept telling me to go right down to the city and make sure he published nothing, not even a made-up story. Dando said, no, it's all right. He still doesn't know where you live. And then Matt walked into the conversation and said that he wanted to spend his spring vacation with me and that he promised not to do anything untoward. Matt kept using untoward. I don't know where he got that expression, but he liked it and kept using it. That's how I knew Matt was speaking everything was untoward. That night, I fell asleep with all these people discussing the probability of my being found in the hall back to the city. Suddenly, Frightful broke into the conversation. She said, "Don't let that Matt come up here. He eats too much." That was the first time that Frightful had ever talked in a forum. I was delighted, for I was always sure that she had more to say than a few cries. She had not missed Matt's appetite. Excuse me. The farm dissolved in a good humored, everyone being delighted with Frightful. I lifted my head to look at her. She had her beak and her feathers of her back, sound asleep. She spoke in my head, however, and said, "You really want to be found, or you would not have told Matt all you did." "I like it better when you don't talk," I said, pulling her deeper, her deer hide over me, and fell into a deep sleep. 161, in which I cooperate with the ending. By the middle of March, I could have told you it was spring without looking. Jesse did not come around anymore. He was fishing the rewarding waters of the open streams. He was returning to a tree hollow full of babies. The barren weasel did not come by. There were salamanders and frogs to keep him busy. The chickadees sang alone, not in a winter group, and the skunks and minks and foxes found food more abundant in the forest than in my treehouse. The circumstances that had brought us all together in the winter were no more. There was food on the land, and the snow was slipping away. By April, I was no longer living off my storehouse. There were bulbs, tubers, and greens to be had. Meals were varied once more. There were frogs, legs, eggs, and turtle soup on my table. I took my bath in the spring again rather than in the turtle shell with the warmed over water. I plunged regularly into the ice water of the spring, shouting as my breath was grabbed from my lungs. I scrubbed, ran from my tree, and dried myself before the fire, shouting as I stepped into my clothes. Then I would sing. I made up a lot of nice songs after my bath, one of which I taught to a man who was hiking along the top of a gorge one day. He said his name was Aaron, and he was quiet and tall. I found him sitting on the edge of a cliff looking across the valley. He was humming little tunes. He had a sad smile that never went away. I knew I would not have to hide from him just by looking at him, so I walked up and sat down beside him. I taught him my water song. I learned he wrote songs and that he was from New York. He had come to the Catskills for the Passover festivities and had wandered off for the day. He was about to go back when I sat down and said, "I heard you humming." "Yes," he said, "I hum a good deal. Can you hum?" "Yes," I replied, "I can hum. I hum a good deal too, and even sing, especially when I get out of the spring. When I get off the spring in the morning, then I really sing aloud. Let's hear you sing aloud." "So," I said, feeling very relaxed with the sun shining on my head, "all right, I'll sing you my cold water song." "I like that," Aaron said. "Sing it again." So I did. Words to fit the tune and the tune to fit the words, and then we both sang it. "Mind if I use the hum 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 D part?" he asked presently. "You can use all of it," I said. "Tunes are free up here. I got that one from the Red-Eye Vero." And here's the Red-Eye Vero. It's a bird that has a distinct red eye, and it is known for its singing. He sat up and said, "What other songs are sung up here?" I whistled him the "Hi Chickadee" song of the black-capped Mr. Brackett and the waterfall song of the wood thrush. He took out a card, lined it with 5 lines, and wrote in little marks. I stretched back in the sun and hummed the song of the brown thrasher and the barometer, the nuthatcher. Then I boomed out the song of the great horned owl and stopped. "That's enough, isn't it?" I asked. "I guess so." He lay back and stretched, looked into the leaves, and said, "If I do something with this, I'll come back and play it for you. I'll bring my portable organ." "Fine," I said. After a drowsy pause, he said, "Will you be around these parts this summer?" "I'll be around," I said. Aaron fell asleep, and I rolled over in the sun. I liked him. He hadn't asked me one personal question. Oddly enough, I wasn't sure whether that made me glad or not. Then I thought of the words Frightful had spoken in my head. You want to be found, and I began to wonder. I had set out a human being. This would not have happened a year ago. I fell asleep. When I woke, Aaron was gone, and Frightful was circling me. She saw me stir, swooped down, and sat on a rock beside me. I said hi, but did not get up. I lay still listening to the birds and snipes and sputs of insects moving in the dry leaves in the air, stirring the newly leafing trees. Nothing went on in my head. It was comfortably blank. I knew the pleasures of the lizard on the long log who knows where its next meal is coming from. I also knew his boredom. After an hour, I did have a thought. Aaron had said that he was up in the Catskills for Passover, that it must be near Easter, and Matt would be coming soon. I'd not counted notches in weeks. A cool shadow crossed my face, and I rose, whistled Frightful to come to my hand, and wandered slowly through the home, stuffing my pockets with spring beauty bulbs as I went. Several days later, I met Matt on Route 77 at the 3:30 mark. I tied his handkerchief around his eyes and led him stumbling and tripping up the mountain. I went almost directly home. I guess I didn't much care if he remembered how to get there or not. Then I took off the blindfold and he looked round. Where are they? Where are your house? I sat down and motioned for him to sit. He did so with great willingness. In fact, he flopped. What do you sleep on the ground? Pointed to the deerskin flap moving in the wind in the hemlock. What do you do? Live in a tree? Yep. Matt bounced his feet as we went. I propped the door open so that the light streamed in, and he shouted with joy. I lit the tallow candle, and we went over everything, and each invention he viewed with a shout, while prepared trout baked in wild grape leaves. Matt sat on the bed and told me the world news in brief. I listened with care to the trouble in Europe, the trouble in the Far East, the trouble in the South, and the trouble in America, also to a few sensational murders, some ball scores, and his report card. It all proves my point, I said sagely. People live too close together. Is that why you are here? Well, not exactly. The main reason is that I don't like to be dependent, particularly on electricity, rails, steam, oil, coal, machines, and all these things that can go wrong. Well, is that why you're up here? Well, not exactly. Some men climb Mount Everest because it was there. Here's a wilderness. Is that why? Aw, come on, Matt. See that falcon? Hear those white-throated sparrows? Smell that skunk? Well, the falcon takes the sky, the white-throated sparrow takes the low bushes, the skunk takes the earth, and you take the newspaper office. I take the woods. Don't you get lonely? Lonely? I've hardly had a quiet moment since arriving. Stop being a reporter and let's eat. Besides, there are people in the city who are lonelier than I. Okay, let's eat. This is good, darn good. In fact, the best meal I've ever eaten. We ate and stopped asking questions. Spent the next week fishing, hunting, trapping, gathering greens and bulbs. Matt talked less and less, slept, hiked, and pondered. He also ate well and kept Frightful very busy. He made himself a pair of moccasins out of deer and a hat that I couldn't even describe. We didn't have a mirror, so he never knew how it looked. But I could say this, when I happened to meet him as we came fishing along the stream bed, I was always startled. I never did get used to that hat. Toward the end of the week, who should we find sleeping in my bed after returning from a fishing trip? But Bando. Spring vacation, he said. That night, we played our reed whistles for Matt by an outdoor fire. It was that warm. Matt and Bando had also decided to make a guest house out of the other trees. Excuse me. I said, yes, let's, because I felt that way, although I knew what it meant. A guest house meant I was no longer a runaway. I was no longer hiding in the wilderness. I was living in the woods like anyone else living in the house. People drop by, neighbors come in for dinner. There are 3 meals to get, the shopping to do, the cleaning. to accomplish. I felt exactly as I felt when I was home. The only difference was that it's a little harder to visit out here, but not too hard. There's that Matt and Bando. We all burned and dug out another hemlock. I worked with them, wondering what was happening to me. Why didn't I cry? No. What made me happily build a city in the forest? Because that is what we were doing. When the tree was done, Bando had discovered that the sap was running in willow trees and the limbs were just right for slide whistles. He spent the evening making us trombones, so we played them together. That word, together. Maybe that was the answer to the city. Matt said rather uncomfortably just before bedtime. There may be some photographers in these hills. Matt, I hardly protested. What did you write? It was Bando who pulled out the article. He read it, a few follow ups and comments from many other papers. When he leaned it back against his leaning tree, as it had come to be, and puffed silently on his pipe. Let's face it, Thoreau, you can't live in America today and be quietly different. If you're going to be different, you're going to stand out, and people are going to hear about you. And in your case, if they hear about you, they will remove you to the city or move to you, and you won't be different anymore. A pause. Did the owls nest, Thoreau? I told him about the owls and how the young played around the hemlock. And then we went to bed a little sad, all of us. Time was running out. Matt had to return to school, and Bando stayed on to help me burn out another tree for another guest house. We chopped off the blackened wood, made one bed, and started the second before we had to return to his teaching. I wasn't alone, or I wasn't alone long. Mr. Jacket found me. I was out on the raft trying to catch an enormous snapping turtle. It would take my line, but then I got its head above the water. It would eye me with those cold, ancient eyes and let go. Frightful was nearby. I was making a noose to throw over the turtle's head the next time it surfaced. Frightful let on my shoulder with a thud and a hard grip. She had drawn up and pinch, which is in her language of people. So I wasn't surprised to hear her voice call from across the stream. Hi, Daniel Broom. What are you doing? There stood Mr. Jacket. I'm trying to get this well of a snapper, I said in such an ordinary voice that it was dull. I went on with the noose making, and he called to me, hit it with a club. I still couldn't catch the old tiger, so I rafted to shore and got Mr. Jacket. About an hour later, we had the turtle. I cleaned it and knew that Mr. Jacket was Tom Sidler. Come on up to the house, I said, and he came on up to the house, and it was just like after school on 3rd Avenue. He wanted to see everything, of course, and he didn't think it unusual, but he got over it in a hurry and settled down to helping me prepare the meat for turtle soup. And guys, this is a giant snapping turtle here, so they are trying to catch this giant turtle, and you can see how big they get here. And they're trying to turn it into turtle soup. He dug the onions. He dug the onions for it while I got it boiling in the tin can. Turtle is as tough as rocks and has to be boiled for hours before it gets tender. We flavored the soup with hickory salt and cut a lot of Solomon seal tubers into it. Tom said it was too thin, and I thickened it with mashed up nuts. I'd run out of acorn flour. I tried some orris root in it. Pretty fair. Want to stay and eat and spend the night? I asked him. Somewhere along the way, he said sure, but added that he had better go home and tell his mother. It took him about 2 hours to get back, and the turtle was still tough. So we went out to the meadow to fly Frightful. She caught her own meal. We tied her to her perch and climbed to the gorge until almost dark. We ate turtle soup. Tom slept in the guest tree. I lay awake, wondering what had happened. Everything seemed so every day. I liked Tom, and he liked me, and he came up often, almost every weekend. He told me about his bowling team and some of his friends, and I began to feel I knew a lot of people in the town below the mountain. This made my wilderness small. When Tom left one weekend, I wrote this down. Tom said that he and Reed went into an empty house, and when they heard the real estate man come in, they slid down the laundry chute to the basement and crawled out of the basement window. He said a water main broke and flooded the school grounds, and all the kids took off their shoes and played baseball in it. I drew a line through this and I wrote, I haven't seen the Baron Weasel. I think he has deserted his den by the boulder. A catbird is nesting nearby. Apparently, it has learned that Frightful is tied some of the time because it comes right up to the fireplace for scraps when the leash is snapped. And guys, this is a catbird. They think these birds act like cats, and they also think their fur kind of looks like cat fur. I drew a line through this too and filled up the rest of the piece of the bark with a drawing of Frightful. I went to the library the next day and took out 4 books. Aaron came back. He came right to the hemlock forest and called. I didn't ask him how he knew I was there. He stayed a week, mostly puttering around with the willow whistle. Never asked what I was doing on the mountain. It's as if he already knew, as if he had talked to someone or read something and there was nothing more to question. I had the feeling that as an old story somewhere beyond the foot of the mountain. I didn't care. Bando got a car and he came up more often. He never mentioned any more newspaper stories, and I never asked him. I just said to him one day, I seem to have an address now. He said, You do. I said, It is Broadway and 42nd Street. He said, Almost. His eyebrows knitted and he looked at me sadly. It's all right, Bando. Maybe you better bring me a shirt and some blue jeans when you come next time. I was thinking if they haven't sold that house in town, maybe Tom and I could slide down that laundry chute. Bando slowly turned a willow whistle over in his hands. He didn't play it. In which the city comes to me. The warbles arrived, the trees turned summer green, and June burst over the mountains. Smelled good, tasted good, and was gentle to the eyes. I stretched out on the big rock in the meadow one morning. Frightful was jabbing at some insects in the grass below me when suddenly a flash bulb exploded and a man appeared. Guys, so this is a flash bulb camera. So this is that light is the flash bulb, and that's the kind of camera that they used back in the day to take pictures. Wild boy, he said, and took another picture. What are you doing? Eating nuts? I sat up. My heart was heavy. It was so heavy that I posed for him, holding Frightful in my fist. I refused to take him to my tree, however, and he finally left. 2 other photographers came and a reporter. I talked a little. When they left, I rolled over on my stomach and wondered if I could get in touch with the Department of Interior and find out more about public lands in the West. My next thought was the baseball game in the flooded schoolyard. 4 days passed, and I talked to many reporters and photographers. At noon on the 5th day, a voice called from the glen. I know you're there. Dad, I shouted, and once again burst down the mountainside to see my father. As I ran towards him, I heard sounds that stopped me, sounds of branches and twigs breaking, of the flowers being crushed. Hordes were coming. For a long moment, I stood wondering whether to meet Dad or run forever. I was self-sufficient. I could travel the world over, never needing a penny, never asking anything of anyone. I could cross to Asia in a canoe via the Bering Strait. I could raft to an island. I could go around the world on the fruits of the land. I started to run. I got as far as the gorge and turned back. I wanted to see Dad. I walked down the mountain to greet him and to face the people he had brought from the city to photograph me, interview me, and bring me home. I walked slowly, knowing that it was all over. I could hear the voices of the other people. They filled my silent mountain. Then I jumped in the air and laughed for joy. I recognized my 4-year-old brother's pleasure song. The family. Dad had brought the family. Every one of them. I ran, twisting and turning through the trees like a Hooper's hawk, and occasionally riding a free 50 feet downhill on the aspen sapling. Dad, Mom, I shouted as I came upon them along the stream bed, carefully picking their way through the raspberry bushes. Dad gave me a resounding slap, and Mother hugged me until she cried. John jumped on me. Jim threw me into the rushes. Mary sat on me. Alice put leaves in my hair. Hank pulled Jim off. Joan pulled me to my feet, and Jake bit my ankle. That cute little baby sister toddled away from me and cried. Wow, all of New York, I said. This is a great day for the Catterskills. I led them proudly up the mountain, thinking about dinner and what I had and would go round. I knew how Mother felt when we brought in friends for dinner. As we approached the hemlock grove, I noticed that Dad was carrying a pack. He explained it as food for the first few days, or until I could teach John, Jim, Hank, and Jake how to live off the land. I winked at him. But Dad, a Gribbly is not for the land. What do you mean? He shouted. The Gribblies have had land for 3 generations. We pioneer, we open the land. He was almost singing. And then we go to sea, I said. Things have changed. Child labor laws. You can't take children to sea. I should have glowed over such a confession from Dad had I not been making furious plans as we climbed. Food, bed, chores. Dad, however, had since Christmas to outplan me, strung up hammocks for everyone all through the forest, and you never heard a happier bunch of kids. The singing and shouting and giggling sent the birds and wildlife deeper into the shadows. Even little Nina had a hammock, and though she was only a toddler, she cooed and giggled all by herself as she rocked between 2 aspens near the meadow. We ate Mother's fried chicken. Chicken is good. It tastes like chicken. I shall never forget that evening, and I shall never forget what Dad said. Son, when I told your mother where you were, she said, well, if he doesn't want to come home, then we'll bring home to him. And that's why we are all here. I was stunned. I was beginning to realize that this was not an overnight camping trip, but a permanent arrangement. Mother saw my expression and said, when you are of age, you can go wherever you please. Until then, I still have to take care of you according to the law, all the law I can find. She put her arms around me, and we rocked ever so slightly. Besides, I'm not a Gribbly, I'm a Stewart, and the Stewarts love the land. She looked at the mountain and the meadow and the gorge, and I felt her feet squeeze into the earth and take root. The next day, I took John, Jim, and Hank out into the mountain meadows with Frightful to see if we could not round up enough food to feed this city of people. We did pretty well. When we came back, there was Dad with 4 4x4s erected at the edge of my meadow, and a pile of wood that would have covered a barn. Gosh, Dad, I cried, what on earth are you doing? We're going to have a house, he said. I was stunned and hurt. A house? You'll spoil everything, I protested. Can't we live in trees and hammocks? No. Your mother said that she was going to give you a decent home, and in her heart of looking at it, that means a roof and doors. She got awfully mad at those newspaper stories, inferring that she had not done her duty. But she did. I was almost at the point of tears. She's a swell mother. What other boy has a mother who would let him do what I did? I know, but a woman lives among her neighbors. Your mother took all those editorials personally as if they were Miss Brackett and Miss O'Brien speaking. The nation became her neighbors, and no one, not even, he hesitated, a catbird meowed. Not even that catbird is going to think that she neglected you. I was about to protest in a loud, strong voice when Mother's arms slipped around my shoulders. That's how it is until you're 18, Sam, she said, and that ended it. So guys, there you go. That is the end of My Side of the Mountain. Thank you for following along. If you made it this whole time, there is no quiz today. Just watch the video, write me up a paragraph telling me what you thought about the book, and hopefully I'll see you guys on Friday.